All right, 3.3, we're going to learn a new strategy on how to solve quadratic equations, and that's called completing the square. So before we get into completing the square, there's one other way that we can solve quadratic equations too. So we're going to be solving using square roots. So first thing we want to do is factor the left side of our equation. What are two factors of 64 that add to negative 16? Negative 8 and negative 8. So this factors into x minus 8 times x minus 8, which can also be written as x minus 8 squared. Now, if we think about what we did on the quiz yesterday, how would we solve this? Square root both sides. Awesome. So square rooting cancels out with the squared. So I'm left with x minus 8 is equal to what? Awesome. Plus or minus 10. Don't forget, whenever you take the square root of both sides, you need plus or minus, and the square root of 100 is 10. What would we do next? Add 8 to both sides. So it moves it to the other side. Can I combine 8 and 10? Are they like terms? Yes. But we have to be careful because we have a positive 10 here and a negative 10. So because this is actually two different numbers, we're going to split it up and do it separate. So x is equal to 8 plus 10, and x is equal to 8 minus 10, because it's a positive 10 and a negative 10. I don't think there were any questions where you had to do this on the quiz. So 8 plus 10 is, and 8 minus 10, negative 2. So these are our two answers here. Let's look at number 1 on the next page. So we're going to do the same thing. Let's factor the left side. What are two factors of 4 that add to 4? 2 and 2. So how would I write that in my parentheses squared? X plus 2 squared. Awesome, because it would be x plus 2 times x plus 2, which since we have two of them, we write it as x plus 2 squared. Next, what would I do to solve? Square root both sides, cancel out with the squared. So I have x plus 2 is equal to what? Plus or minus 6. Now what would we do? Subtract 2. Can I combine 2 and 6? Are they like terms? Yeah. But because it's a positive 6 and a negative 6, we're going to split it and do it separate. So I have x is equal to negative 2 plus 6, and x is equal to negative 2 minus 6. So negative 2 plus 6 is 4, and negative 2 minus 6, negative 8. So those would be our two answers. Any questions there? Let's do the same thing with number 2. What are two factors of 9 that add to negative 6? Negative 3 and negative 3. So what would this factor into? X minus 3 squared. What would I do next to solve? Square root both sides, so it cancels out with the squared. So x minus 3 is equal to, what's the square root of 1? 1. But what am I missing? Plus or minus. Anytime you take the square root of both sides, you need the plus or minus. What would we do next? Add 3. We can combine 3 and 1, so we got to split it up into 2 since 1 is a positive 1 and negative 1. So x is equal to 3 plus 1, and x is equal to 3 minus 1. What's 3 plus 1? 4, and 3 minus 1? 2. So x is equal to 4 and 2. All right, let's do 3. What are two factors of 21 that add to negative 22? I have 121 that add to negative 22. Negative 11 and negative 11. So what would this factor into? X minus 11 squared equals 81. What do we do next? Square root both sides, so it cancels out with the squared. So we have x minus 11 is equal to Plus or minus 9. Perfect. What's next? Add 11. We can combine 11 and 9, so we got to split up the plus or minus 9. So we have x is equal to 11 plus 9, and x is equal to 11 minus 9. What's 11 plus 9? 20. And what's 11 minus 9? So x is equal to 20 and 2. All right, next we're going to get into completing the square. So to complete the square, we always want our x's on one side of the equation, and then we're going to use this little formula here to help us complete the square. b over 2 squared. So we're going to use this every time to complete the square. b over 2 squared. So just make sure the b comes from the number in front of the x. That's where the b in the formula comes from. So here, it's just asking us for the number that makes it a perfect square trinomial, so we're just using that little formula, and then it wants us to write the expression as the square of a binomial. So first thing we want to do is find what number for c makes it a perfect square. So we're going to use our formula, b over 2 squared. And we said that b comes from the number in front of the x. So what would our b be here? 14. So we have 14 over 2 squared. What's 14 over 2? 7. And what's 7 squared? 49. So the value of c that makes it a perfect square is 49. So that's the first part of the question. The second part asks us to write it as a perfect square binomial. So we have x squared plus 14x plus 49. What are two values of 49 that add to 14? 7 and 7. So how would we write this? X plus 7 squared. Awesome. So this is the other part of our answer. I'm not sure if the big ideas asks for both things. If it does, it'll probably give you 2 boxes where it asks you what's the value of c. So you have to find that. And when you write it as a perfect square binomial, that'd be x plus 7 squared. So it'll probably give you 2 boxes if it asks for both of these. Right, let's do it again with number 4. So what's the little formula that we use to complete the square? b over 2 squared. And what's our b here? 8. So it'd be 8 over 2 squared. What's 8 over 2? 4. And what's 4 squared? 16. So 16 is our value of c. That makes it a perfect square. So we have x squared plus 8x plus 16. Now what are 2 factors of 16 that add to 8? 4 and 4. So how would we write this as a perfect square binomial? X plus 4 squared. All right, let's look at 5. So what's the little formula that we use to complete the square? b over 2 squared. And what's our b here? Negative 2. So we have negative 2 over 2 squared. What's negative 2 over 2? Negative 1. And negative 1 squared? 1. So 1 is our value of c that completes the square. Now let's plug it in. We have x squared minus 2x plus 1. What are 2 factors of 1 that add to negative 2? Negative 1 and negative 1. So this would factor into what? X minus 1 squared. Perfect. Any questions here? Let's look at 6. What's the little formula that we use to complete the square? b over 2 squared. And what's our b here? Negative 9. So we have negative 9 over 2 squared. Can I simplify negative 9 over 2? No. So we'll just leave it as a fraction. How would I square a fraction? What do I do? Square the top and square the bottom. So what's negative 9 squared? 81. And what's 2 squared? 4. So our value of c that completes the square is 81 over 4. So that's part of our answer. Second part, let's plug it in. We have x squared minus 9x plus 81 over 4. It's always plus because you square it, so it turns positive. So it'll always be plus the c. Let's think about this for a second. Let's go back and look at the other two. So let's notice a pattern. When we plug in a number into our parentheses squared, we always take the x that's squared and then the number before we square it. So notice how in our parentheses we have x plus 4. Same thing with the second one. I always take the x that's squared. And what was the number before I squared it here? -1. So it's x minus 1 in the parentheses. So looking at the third question here, number 6, what do you think is going to go into my parentheses? X, and what was the number before I squared it? -9 over 2. So it'd be x minus 9 over 2 squared. You always just take the number before you square it, and that's what goes into the parentheses. We'll start to do more of this in solving, and you'll see it's easier just to take the number before you square it and plug it in. All right, example 3. So here we're going to be solving by completing the square. Example 3 has a decent amount of steps, but it's everything we did in example 1 and example 2 put together. So it's steps that we know how to do. So let's take a look. When we're completing the square, we always want to get the x's all by itself and move the number to the other side. So how would I move the 7 to the other side? Subtract 7. So I have x squared minus 10x. I'm going to leave a space to complete the square, and it's equal to -7. Now, what's the little formula that I use to complete the square? b over 2 squared. What's my b here? -10, the number in front of the x, which would be -10. So we have -10 over 2 squared. What's -10 over 2? -5. And what's -5 squared? 25. So before we move on, we have to be careful because I just pulled the purple part out of nowhere. I put it into my equation. I added 25 onto the left side of my equation. That was not there before. I made it up. So we have to be careful that we keep our equation balanced. So if I'm adding 25 on the left side of my equation, I also have to add it on the right side too. So we have to keep the equation balanced. So let's go back and look at our left side. So in our parentheses squared, I'm going to put the x that's squared. What else is being squared here? On the left side, what else is being squared? The x I put in my equation? -5. So -5 I also put here. So it's x minus 5 squared. And then that's going to be equal to, what's -7 plus 25? 18. So now this looks exactly like the questions we had in example 1. What would I do next to solve? Square root both sides. Square root to cancel out with the squared. So we have x minus 5 is equal to what? Plus or minus. And let's see if we can simplify the square root of 18. What are 2 factors of 18?
2 and 9.
6 and 3. 2 and 9 would work too. You'll end up with the same thing. What are 2 factors of 6? 3 and 2. So do I have any pairs? So what's going to come to the outside? And what stays on the inside? Awesome. So we just simplified our square root 18. Now we have one last step. Got to move the 5 to the other side. Get it to be x equals. So I'm going to add 5. Can I combine 5 and 3 square root 2? No, they're not like terms. So we're just going to leave it as 5 plus or minus 3 square root 2. So we just leave them separate. We can't combine them together, so we just leave it like that. That's how we solve with completing the square. So it does seem like a lot of steps, but it's going to be the same steps, the same pattern over and over again. So you'll see by the time we do the next 3 examples, you're going to be like, oh, I'm good. I'm a professional at this. It's a lot of little steps. You guys did the first 2, example 1 and 2, all by yourself. I saw some of you guys were going ahead. You did it before I did. You know how to do this stuff. You just have to be careful. It's just one step at a time. Any questions here? All right, let's look at 7. So we said we want the x's on one side and we have to move the number to the other. So what would I do to move the 8 to the other side? Subtract 8. So I have x squared minus 4x. I'm going to leave a space to complete the square, and it's equal to negative 8. What's the little formula that I use to complete the square? B over 2 squared. And what's my b here? Negative 4. So negative 4 over 2 squared. What's negative 4 over 2? Negative 2. And what's negative 2 squared? 4. So if I'm adding 4 to the left side, what do I also have to do? Add it to the right side too. Make sure we keep our equation balanced. So since I'm adding 4 on the left, I also have to add it to the right. Now in my parentheses squared, what's going to go in there? Awesome. We take the x, because that's being squared, and the minus 2. And then that's equal to, what's negative 8 plus 4? Negative 4. Any questions on how we got here? We're good so far? What would we do next? Square root both sides. Cancel out with the squared. So x minus 2 is equal to what? When we take the square root of both sides, what do we need? Plus or minus. What's the square root of negative 4? 2i. Perfect. So plus or minus 2i. Nicholas, what would we do next? Add 2. Can I combine 2 and 2i? Nope. They are not like terms, so we just leave it separate. So 2 plus or minus 2i. All right, so we completed the square, and we got x plus 4 squared equals 21. Any questions on how we got here? Did everybody get this far? Awesome. What do we do next? Square root both sides. So, awesome. X plus 4 equals the plus or minus the square root of 21. Let's check to see if we can simplify the square root of 21. What are 2 factors of 21? 7 and 3. Can I break it down any more? Do I have any pairs? Nope, so it doesn't simplify. What's the last step? Subtract 4 on both sides. So x is equal to negative 4 plus or minus square root 21. Raise your hand if you got the right answer. Awesome. Good job, guys. So example 4 is the same idea. However, we have to be careful because our leading coefficient is not 1. So we can't just go ahead and complete the square right away. So what do you think I could do first here? Awesome. We have a GCF. Let's take out our GCF. We're going to divide everything by 3. So it goes away. So we're left with, let's change the color so we can see, x squared plus 4x plus 5 is equal to 0. What should we do next? Move the 5, so we're going to subtract 5. So x squared plus 4x, I'm going to leave a space, is equal to negative 5. What's the little formula that I use to complete the square? B over 2 squared. And what's the B? 4. So 4 over 2 squared. What's 4 over 2? And 2 squared is 4. What should I do next? What do I do next? I have to make sure I add 4 to the other side, and let's write our parentheses squared. What's going to go into the parentheses squared? Awesome. X is being squared and 2 is being squared, so x plus 2. And then that would be equal to negative 5 plus 4, which is negative 1.
Wouldn't that be 3x?
We divided out the 3, so it went away.
Oh, okay.
What would we do next to solve? Square root both sides. So it cancels out with the squared. So I have x plus 2 is equal to, what's the square root of negative 1? Just 1i? Plus or minus 1i, which is just plus or minus I. Because we wouldn't write 1x. 1 is, we don't need it. What would we do next? Subtract 2. So x is equal to, can I combine 2 and I together? Nope. So negative 2 plus or minus I. All right, let's take a look at 11. So 11, we're going to do the same thing. It just looks a little different to start. Any suggestions on what I should do first? I can distribute. Let's distribute the 6x. So I have 6x squared plus 12x is equal to negative 42. What should I do next? Let's take out a GCF. So I'm going to divide everything by 6. So when we have a leading coefficient that's not 1, it's going to make completing the square a lot harder. So if you have a GCF, take out the GCF. So we're left with x squared plus 2x. I'm going to leave a space to complete the square. What's negative 42 divided by 6? Negative 7. All right, what's the little formula that we use to complete the square? B over 2 squared. And what's the b here? 2. So 2 over 2 squared. What's 2 over 2? 1. And what's 1 squared? 1. So I'm adding 1 on the left side. What do I also have to do? Don't forget to add it to the other side too. So now in our parentheses squared, what are we going to put? X plus 1. And that's equal to, what's negative 7 plus 1? Negative 6. What do we do next? Square root both sides. So x plus 1 is equal to what? Plus or minus I square root 6. We can't break down square root 6. What are 2 factors of 6? 2 and 3. Do I have any pairs? Nope, so nothing comes out. But we could take out the negative and turn it into an I. So make sure you take out the I, but we can't simplify square root 6. What's the last step? Subtract 1. So x is equal to -1 plus or minus I square root 6.